Batra Daf Pezayin Amud Aleph by the Gemara. Gemara says in the first case, in the Mishnah that we had mentioned that if you're selling the wine or the oil and the price went up or down, Gemara says, Hamida, whose measuring cup are we talking about? The man. Either if it belongs to the buyer, how can the price? What is the difference if the price changed or if it wasn't measured before the seller? It goes to the seller. If if the measurement cup belongs to the buyer, then he automatically acquires it right away. Who cares what point you're at? It goes by each piece, each unit, like we mentioned before, every ounce, for example. So then what? If the seller's measuring cup, why did the Mishnah say that you have to wait for it to fill up? The measuring cup of the seller, even if it fills up to the tippy top, it doesn't go to the buyer yet. He has to acquire it. Says, okay, we go down the middle. The midat sarasur is talking about the measuring cup belonging to a third party, like a broker, and therefore only if the broker it fills up, the broker's cup acquires it for the buyer. Gemara says, but the next part of the Mishnah says, if the middleman is a broker between them and the barrel broke, it breaks for the middleman. It's not like the first part of Mishnah is not talking about the middleman. Gemara says, okay, the first case is talking about a case where the middleman wasn't there. They're just using his measuring cup. In the second case, talking about the case where the middleman is there, and if he takes it and it breaks while it's in his possession, while before he delivers it, it's his problem. Okay. Next part of the Mishnah. He's Mishnah mentioned an interesting case. You have 3 drops. If you turn it, he went from Bavel to Eretz, he found him Ziri. He told him, who did Rav teach over here the halachot regarding measurements? He pointed to Rav Yitzchak. Rav asked him, what's your issue? Then he said, I have a problem. The Mishnah says, if the seller spilled it out, the 3 drops, and then he quickly turns it back upright, and there's residue in the bottom, it belongs to the seller, to the initial owner. He has a problem. If I'm pouring oil up teruma into another barrel or whatnot, after the 3 drops, even if I keep it out, it's still teruma. So how come in our case the seller pours it, the seller keeps it, and in the case of teruma, if I pour it into the teruma, even if it stays in my bucket, it's still teruma. It should stay mine and not teruma, like the case of the seller, that it doesn't go to the buyer. The Gemara says, we already mentioned, the case of the seller is different. The case of the seller, the guy who's buying it was mochel. He was yeush. I don't need it. I don't want it. It's fine. That's why the seller could keep it. But teruma doesn't work like that. Okay. So the Mishnah mentioned the storekeeper does not have to wait for the 3 drops to drip out. And Rabbi then said, Erev Shabbat you're patur from doing that as well. So, Ibai will ask the question, is Rabbi referring to the first case, that when the first opinion, Tanakama says that a guy is required to pour 3 drops out, and Rabbi says you're patur. Right? Rabbi would say that Tanakama would hold you always have to let it drip out, and Rabbi says no, you're patur by Erev Shabbat. Maybe he's going on the second part of the halacha, that the storekeeper is not required to let the 3 drops at all because of his business, and therefore when Rabbi says you're only patur on Erev Shabbat, it's actually machmir, because that means Sunday through Friday you are chayav. Where it says, Tashma bring a proof that the time brother says, Erev Shabbat imhashecha hinvani patur. Erev Shabbat, right before Shabbat starts, the storekeeper is patur. Because the storekeeper is busy. So we see from here, Bidah actually is machmir. He only says that the storekeeper is busy on Friday. Therefore, the storekeeper is patur from pouring out those last 3 drops. But other days of the week, he has to wait for the drops to fall, even if the store is full. New Mishnah. Very interesting case. I send my minor son to a storekeeper to buy oil. And he has a pundion, which is 2 selas. 2 isar actually. 2 isar coins is 1 pundion. So he has the pundion in his hand. And the storekeeper measured an isar's worth of oil, which is half. But as change, he gave 1 isar coin back. Now you send the child back home. What's the problem? This child broke the oil on the way home. The isar lost the coin. The storekeeper's chayav on the coin and on the oil. This is me patur. Shamanat ken shelacho, because the father had the intention to send the child to bring it back, and therefore the storekeeper is patur. It's not like you sent it with a illegitimate shliach because the father himself wanted you to do that. Chachamim would agree to be Yudah when the flask is in the child's hand. The father sent the receptacle, the pitcher to get the oil. The storekeeper put oil into it. Then your storekeeper's patur because obviously the father wants it. Okay. Gemara. Based on what I understand the machlok between the oil and the coin. Because the Rabbanan Savri the Odia Shetri, because Rabbanan hold that maybe the storekeeper was being told by the son what the father wanted, but not to send it with the son. And therefore, if the kid broke the oil and lost the coin, you have to pay. You have to pay for it. Rabbi Das Savar l'shidur l'shadar. Rabbi Das says no, you're patur because obviously the father wants it back. Elatz lochit aved midati. But why regarding the actual flask? You're chayav. If you send him a flask, then the guy obviously doesn't care if the kid breaks it. So therefore, if the kid broke it, why you're chayav in the flask? Mar says, the cases where the kid's father is actually a guy who sells flasks, and therefore, he sent the kid to take it to the storekeeper for the storekeeper to check it out if he wants to buy it. According to Shmuel, if you take something from a craftsman, you go to the glass store, beautiful item, you drop it, and an accident happened and it breaks, you're chayav. According to Shmuel. Okay, limit the Shmuel Tanaim. Does that mean Shmuel's halacha is machlokes Tanaim? No, obviously Shmuel can't say halacha against the Mishnah. Machlokes in the Mishnah. The Gemara says, okay, fine. The storekeeper is the one who's selling flasks, and then when the flask that broke would belong actually to the storekeeper that's selling to the dad. He goes to his reasoning. The Rabbanan go according to the other reasoning because Rabbi holds not my problem, and Rabbi holds not my problem, and Chachamim hold your chayav. Okay. One second. Okay. If you're telling me that the flask was being bought by the father, but the next part of the mission doesn't make sense. Chachamim would agree to you that where the flask was in the kid's hand and the storekeeper measured oil into it. The storekeeper was patur. But you just telling me that the father was just informing the storekeeper what he wanted, but not to send it home with his kid. And if that's the case, that you're buying the flask also, then the storekeeper shouldn't have sent the flask home with the kid. Okay, so now we have to reestablish the case where nobody's selling the flask. The kid brought the flask from home, and we still have the original question. If the father sent the kid with the flask, he should have had Yeush on it, and therefore he should patur. Gemara says, what's the case going on over here? The storekeeper took the flask from the kid to measure the oil. It's according to Rabba. Amar Rabba holds. It's a famous concept that an old man or a Talmid Chacham, everybody's have to hashavat agedah. And therefore, if you find something, you have to return it. But if it's against the person's kavod, Hacham Bavad Yosef finds an animal in the street, he doesn't have to return it because it's against his kavod. But if he moved the animal or caused it to walk because of him, that's basically saying, now it's your problem. Now you have to return it, even though you wouldn't have been chayav in the first place. So too over here, since the storekeeper took it, he's now chayav, and therefore he can't give back. If he poured it directly into the kid's thing, he'd be patur. But he didn't. He took it. Where it says that only makes sense by regarding to animals. Because if you hit the animal to move it, that kind of causes it to walk away from the owner, and now you have to chase after it. But in the case of here, you just took it from the kid, just give it back to the kid. It says, I and the lion of the group explain the Mishnah as following. Who's this lion? So what's the explanation? The storekeeper took the kid's flask to measure other people's stuff. And over here, it's machloket whether or not a person who borrows something without permission, what's the halacha? It's machloket. More savar sholehav. The bidah holds that it's considered a borrowing, and therefore you give back to the kid your patur. Umor savan hachamim hold gazlan havi. If you take something without permission, you took the kid's cup to measure for other customers, considered a thief. What's the difference? A thief has to return it to the rightful owner. The kid is not the rightful owner. The father is the rightful owner. So you give it to the kid and it breaks. Now you're chayav. Beautiful. Kufa, we said earlier. Marshmuel, if you take something from the craftsman and drop it, you're chayav. That only applies. That only applies if the price is set. If it's $1,000 cup, you drop it, you're chayav. Otherwise, you're not konet. The guy one time went to the butcher shop. He lifted a piece of meat to inspect it. But while he was holding it, a horseman came and grabbed it out of his hand and stole it. And they came to Hachamim said, you have to pay for it. You acquired it. That also applies when the price was fixed. There was a nice price tag on it, $20, $1,000. The guy who brought gourd to Pumnahara, everybody came and started taking gourds, but he panicked. He didn't know what's going on. So what did he do? He said, whoever's there, the gourds are hekdesh. He didn't want to lose out. He didn't want to. He said, you know what? Everybody, the gourds are hekdesh. Now nobody can enjoy it. You always have those people. They came to Rav who said, once they took it, they acquired it, and you can't make something hekdesh that's not yours. The Gemara says, that only applies when the gourd price was fixed. $1 a gourd, they acquired it, therefore you can't make a hekdesh. But the price wasn't set, then it's still considered belonging to the owner because the price wasn't set, and therefore it would have been a good hekdesh. Okay, he bought vegetables from the market, and then he started setting them aside, right? So he's buying it from someone who's not a Tamid Chacham, he's buying from Amaris, and therefore you have to assume that maybe the guy didn't take off Turumot Ma'asrot. So you're at Uri's, I don't want to say Uri's because Shalom, but I'm saying you're at a store and you're taking the fruits and you're putting them on the side. Now, is that a good enough acquisition or not? Lokana, I feel even if you're separating the fruits the whole time. Lokana you don't acquire it, and you also are not chayav maaser on it. If you made up your mind, you're going to buy this stuff that you put aside, you put it in your baggies, you put it in your cart, that's what you're buying. You acquired it and you're chayav maaser on it. Now, what do you want to what if you want to return it? You can't return it as is because you have to take off maaser. If you have something in your possession that's chayav maaser, you can't return it. And since you took it from the guy who you have to assume didn't do maaser, therefore you have to do maaser. Now it's a maaser required fruit and you can't return it. You can't make it, you can't take off maaser and return it because then you're reducing the amount of fruits that you took. Or you take also removing 20, you can't just refund them 80 out of the 100. Whereas that's what you do. Maaser, you should take off maaser, take off 10%, whatever it is, and then pay $10 cash and return the other 98. Okay. So 1 second. Just because you decided that you're going to buy it, that automatically makes you acquire it? How's that possible? You didn't pay for anything. It's just in your shopping cart. Gemara says, this is referring to people who are people who really fear heaven. Big time in the Hamim because he holds in himself, he fulfills the pasuk. He speaks truth in his heart. If you have that in you, that you speak truth in your heart, and therefore you plan on doing it, you already acquired it just in your heart, and therefore you should do maaser. This is